Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending upon where you're at.
Mm.
Welcome to a presentation on the rapid change from traditional to remote online instruction for nursing instructors during COVID-19. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Robert Rogers, who will be our presenter this afternoon. Dr. Rogers holds a PhD from UAGC and a master's in business from the University of Mary. He and his wife, Kim, have 3 children and reside in the northern part of the Ozark Mountains. After nearly 3 decades in healthcare and leadership, he has turned his attention to researching asynchronous experiential learning and is the chair of allied health programs at Bryan University in Springfield, Missouri. Welcome, Dr. Rogers, and why don't you take it away?
Dr. Kuzian, thank you for the wonderful introduction. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I do have a special interest in this type of research. And as soon as I get my slideshow open here, I will share a little bit of that background. Okay, again, I want to thank everybody for being here. Again, my name is Robert Rogers, and just a little brief background on me, I think, is relevant to where this research has gone. So I've spent decades in healthcare. I started as a registered nurse, and I began in a time where the highly skills-based registered nursing field was primarily learned in the hospital setting. So you spent a couple of semesters in a sort of theoretical setting. We sat in class. In those days, we were just learning how to use video lecturing. And then by far the majority of the programs consisted of actual skills-based learning. And so what made that very challenging was you're essentially taking a university or a college and you were sort of transferring that into the actual healthcare setting and kind of learning on the fly. Fortunately, technology has increased exponentially since then, but it is still a heavily skills-based occupation. And so, what started with me decades ago was this kind of burning desire to figure out how we actually prepare students for the real healthcare setting, not just nursing. There are a lot of skills-based modalities in healthcare, and how do we take them from the university setting and drop them into the actual healthcare setting where they're safe? And so it kind of created this question in my mind of, can we do it more effectively? What is the key to doing that? How do we blend that classroom session with the actual what we call face-to-face learning or experiential learning? And so my research is based around the lived experience of the nursing instructors. And what I wanted to do was kind of see the world through their eyes. How did they experience it? How did they feel it? How did they see it? Now, in an epic event, 2020, the spring of 2020, this is one of those situations where most of us know exactly where we were when the world shut down. One day you woke up and you saw this sign, the world is temporarily closed. It wasn't just education, it was the grocery store, it was the gas station. If you drove around on the highways, if you had anywhere to go, they were pretty deserted. And so while it affected everyone's life, it was particularly difficult for universities that were trying to prepare students to go into a highly skills-based setting. All of a sudden, one day they wake up and everybody is sent home. So where do we go from there? And that's kind of what the research is based in. So the essence of this problem is that the restrictions of the COVID-19 pandemic created challenges for nursing instructors, right? Created challenges for a lot of people. But what we did, in particular with nursing instructors, is we took these programs and we shut them down overnight without actually dissolving the program. We expected the instructors to continue to teach, because what did it turn out that we needed during the COVID-19 pandemic? We needed more healthcare workers. And we were actually pulling the rug out from the very thing that was providing those workers. So the problem is this rapid transition kind of pulled the rug out from nursing instructors. We sent them home, we sent the students home. What do we do from there? So this disruption in nursing curricula was transitioned to what we might call emergency remote teaching. That's a fairly broad term, and it just simply means that what do we do now? What do we do now? We didn't have we weren't prepared for this. Everything has changed overnight, so we transitioned to emergency remote teaching. Let's keep going. Let's figure out how on the fly. The other thing that really stood out, I think, is that with the skills-based type occupations, there's an assessment phase that's extremely important. It's not just theoretical learning. You can use inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning. You can learn theory from text through normal didactic methods. But how do you assess whether a nurse can competently start an IV through the computer? So these are all questions that I think we have been facing for decades, but I think the pandemic really just brought this into focus. And then the last thing that I think really stood out in the research is how do you engage those students, right? How do we create a student population asynchronously online in this digital world where the students really getting in there engaged, where they're really excited to learn? We know that that's the best learning environment, but what happened to that engagement when we just sent them all home? So all great questions, and we'll cover those as we go through here. So two primary research questions. How do these nursing instructors describe the student engagement levels during this rapid transition? So again, what I wanted to do was kind of back up and look through the eyes and the words and the experience of those nursing instructors. One thing to note about nursing instruction is they've done a fantastic job of creating some continuity in the education. So nursing instruction in Alabama is going to be very similar to what nursing instruction is in Arkansas or Montana or California. We use these national licensing registries to kind of guide that science-based learning. And so how do these nursing instructors describe that engagement? And we can kind of extrapolate that and drag that out into a bigger picture. And then the second question is, how do you describe the effectiveness of that learning? This goes back to the assessment phase. So you're telling someone that you may start an IV 15 to 30 degrees, bevel up on the needle, insert slowly. But how do you really assess whether that's happening? And so this nursing instruction follows, like a lot of industries, it follows a very formative assessment phase while you're in school. And that just simply means that day by day you learn, and it's very, very important to be able to assess at that point whether you have learned before you move on to the next step. And then finally, the licensing phase, all the way you're at the end, is a summative assessment. But it's critical that we be able to assess the learning in an ongoing fashion. Again, we're taking from theory and we're moving into a skills-based industry, and we need to be able to determine whether that learning has occurred. Very challenging. So an overview of the problem. So this transition to remote learning, and you guys will all remember this, many times it was overnight, right? And it was rolled out with any kind of continuity. Some colleges closed down almost instantly. Some kind of sputtered along for a week or two until they figured out what to do. The fact was, as a nation, as a world, we weren't prepared for this action. And so everybody was coming together as quickly as they could to figure out how do we slow this thing down and stop it. And the lack of continuity created additional issues because industries were shutting down at the same time. These very industries, these very hospital systems, where they turn their attention to caring for patients and away from education. And it is important to note that this affected both the students and the instructors. Many instructors teach in person, what we call traditional education frequently. Some teach hybrid, where they may have some online classes, they may have some in person, and then some are fully remote. The fully remote phase has kind of really exploded over the last few years. That is part of the problem. This transition to remote learning, which we should have been focused on, kind of caught us off guard. There were technological challenges. These persist even today. Unstable internet and low bandwidth. I live about 8 miles outside of the third largest city in Missouri, and we still have very challenging internet here. We were able to kind of eke through the pandemic, but it was kind of a share and share alike. You had to kind of watch how much bandwidth you were using in the house. In some areas, we see this in southeast Missouri here still. We just simply don't have internet. The satellite internets are just becoming powerful enough to carry some of the modern softwares. And then everybody kind of experienced this rapid change to fully remote software. What happens when you pull new software out of the box? Lots of issues. And so these things were all done on the fly. The curriculum, although it was relatively easy to transition some of the theoretical base, here's your book, here's your ebook, here's your electronic book, or maybe you have a book at home. Let's read these chapters and we can learn about that theory. But the clinical face-to-face portion of this learning was virtually just shut down overnight. And again, rightfully so, healthcare facilities had to turn their attention to caring for patients. And then an additional part of the problem, of course, is that students suffered engagement issues. Remember what your house looked like in 2020, April 2020, May 2020. Your house became a classroom. Your house became daycare. Your house became the school, the public school. It also became the office. And so all of this was going on in your house. Nobody knew what was going on. And this really challenged, if you did have internet, it challenged the internet bandwidth. And then you're competing with all these other priorities in your home. Everybody needs to use the computer. Everybody needs to do this or that. And so the home in 2020 became kind of all of these things overnight. Again, just to reiterate, I wanted to look at this problem through the eyes of nursing instructors. So this was a qualitative study, and I wanted to hear it in their own voice. Now, it was I did use guided questions to kind of elicit the conversation that would answer my research questions, but I wanted to hear it in their own words, right? I wanted to hear them talk about the effectiveness of the remote teaching. So back to this formative assessment challenge, we don't want our healthcare workers going into their first 30 days, 60 days on the job without these skills in place. It is one thing entirely to be able to pass a standardized licensing exam, but if you can't start IVs or don't understand how to handle medications, it created some very serious challenges. And of course, the idea behind this research is really to just provide a little piece of information, just a little grain of sand of information to continue research. What kind of opportunities and challenges? Some great things came out of this rapid movement, and we may talk about a few of those. But we also wanted to know what challenges there were. What do we need to work on in the future? What kind of research do we need to continue to do that? The design for this study, of course, was qualitative, descriptive, and phenomenological, was surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. We all shared that together, so it became a sort of phenomenon within our life. And then I wanted to do a very deep description of how those nursing instructors actually saw, thought, and felt when all of this happened. I did start with a participant pool of nursing instructors, and I continued interviewing and analyzing data until I started seeing very consistent trends. I ended up with 12 good transcripts. There were many more than that. Some ended up being disqualified, or they were just so far beyond in the consistency of data that we were completely saturated by that point. So somewhere around 8 or 9 interviews, I started seeing the same things uh, repeat over and over. I use a semi-structured interviews again to talk about those lived experiences. And I used in vivo thematic analysis. So basically, it took the transcript, more or less, if you want to picture it in your mind, you put them side by side, picked out the keywords, the key phrases, and I just started drawing parallels from one interview to the next. The software was very helpful in that. But in the end, it takes a lot of conversation, a lot of listening, and then a lot of comparing. And because I went far beyond the consistency of the themes that kept emerging. The trustworthiness and the robustness of this study is pretty solid. So 3 theories that are very, very important when it comes to this asynchronous online instruction. So engagement theory, right? There is a plethora of research that supports that for students to really learn, for that really to stick in their head, or for them to be able to apply that, they need to be engaged. They need to be engaged with the learning. So that is a critical piece of teaching, whether we're going to do it in person, in a hybrid mode, or online. So engagement theory was very important. I personally like constructivist theories. So we start people at one particular station in their academic journey, and each day we build upon that knowledge, and we build and we build and we apply, we learn theory, we learn skills, and in the end, we have transformed. So we are constructing this knowledge, we are constructing this world as we go by doing, hearing, seeing, reading, and learning. And then the third theory that is very important in education, in this type of education specifically, is the formative assessment. So we can't expect nursing students to go off for 3 months and learn by themselves and then come back and just do a summative assessment or summative test. Every single day, every week, we need to kind of be looking at whether learning is occurring during that process and guiding. Without that, it just becomes exponentially more challenging. So these are the themes that kept emerging in the interviews. So engagement challenges, obviously, although that might sound fairly obvious, it is an important thing to note, and it's an important thing to push the research. So how do we continue to engage these students in this remote digital world? The learning environment. Again, think about what your household looked like in 2020. So we know that the environment in which students learn is critical to their learning. All of a sudden, we have, in some cases, created a madhouse out of these people's homes and the instructor as well. And so that environment may not have been conducive to learning. It was difficult to assess over the computer. Many of the tests and especially licensing type tests are proctored so that there's no cheating going on. And how do you do that when they're in somebody's home? You don't know but what they have 5 computer screens open and they're pulling those up. So difficult to assess that learning. And then the very restrictions in the pandemic were stifling to everybody, not just in education, but the guidelines imposed to COVID-19 really affected the clinical face-to-face learning, even when some students started to return to that phase of their education. Many of them were not allowed to do the tasks in healthcare that they needed to do. And unfortunately, I think we've seen this trend continue for the last couple of years, where even at our university, sometimes it can be difficult to place students in a clinical setting because these healthcare facilities went through the pandemic and have kind of in some cases, turned their attention away from education. And then technology, we really have to beef up the technology. That theme kept coming up over and over. Obviously, how do we increase that bandwidth? How do we, excuse me, how do we make that work? So back to the research questions. So how did they describe the student engagement levels? Obviously, a significant amount of engagement issues. Keeping the students online, keeping them online regularly. Do you have synchronous where you're meeting with them face to face on the computer? Asynchronous, how do you make that engaged environment from a distance, from 5 miles, from 1,000 miles, from all the way across the world? So very challenging. And some of the other areas I think that we need to spawn research in are some of the psychosocial results of the pandemic lockdowns on these particular students, and probably on all students. A lot of students faced difficulties in their personal relations, became lonely, especially if they didn't have a family in their house. Physical health challenges. What did we do? We locked ourselves up in our home. So our diets changed, our exercise changed, and then mental health challenges. So all very important findings. Was not what I was looking for, but deserves further research. How did they describe the effectiveness of remote online teaching? They simply had a challenge deducing whether skills were learned by those students. Theory was easier. Again, read the book, take the test, take the quiz. You can discuss those things on the phone. And those things were very important, but it was the inability to assess whether skills were taking place that was challenging. Here's just some things that we need to look into in the future, right? We need to look into remote learning management systems. How do we get better at this digital interface? Virtual simulations. These were really coming online 10 to 15 years ago. We've seen a lot of this in like basic life support. But what we need to create in the future is a fully immersive digital environment where we can actually practice and learn these skills. We're not quite there yet. You'll see some of this in the airlines that works well. Student outcomes going to have to be studied further in the future, but did these students during the pandemic go on to lead successful careers? So those were kind of challenging. Further training for instructors, I think, is important. Personalized learning. This is one of my favorites. So one of the things that I think really stood out about the pandemic is, guess what? This digital world's not all that bad. We can actually create a very personalized learning environment in the digital world. So this is one of those shining stars. We're like, we didn't want to do this overnight, but guess what? We did it, and we figured out that we can connect one-on-one. And we need to continue to increase our technological infrastructure. That's really not up to us. There are companies that are doing that, but I think we're making great gains in the satellite internet. And so just as a recap here, so the disruption of hands-on training, face-to-face clinical, going to the hospital, can this student start an IV on you kind of stuff was the most challenge. Nursing instructors, like a lot of people in college, but again, the thing that we needed during the pandemic was more healthcare workers. We could not put a pause button on nursing instruction. We have to get these students out the door, and we have to get them prepared for licensure. And so that became a challenge. And nursing instructors face that overnight. They're like, go home, keep doing what you were doing, make sure that those students pass. And then we do need to continue to look at balanced curriculums, right? So let's not have all synchronous, asynchronous. The hybrids are great, remote is great, but let's kind of mix it up. Let's be prepared next time. Again, I want to thank you for attending the presentation. It's been enjoyable. It's been an enjoyable journey on the research, and I'll open that up to any questions that you may have in the chat there. And again, thank you.
Dr. Rogers, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in with a question.
Yes.
And so during the whole pandemic, you had millennial students who were not used to this whole remote learning thing. And so they had to actually learn that skill as well as adapt to online learning, which is perfectly understandable. Now, these Gen Z students who you're going to start seeing, do you think they're going to have the expectation of, I just want to learn remotely? I don't want to have that hybrid type of approach?
That is an excellent question. Thank you for that. And we have seen a trend at our university, certainly with younger generations, but I think the convenience too for some of the Gen X's, Gen Y's, maybe they see the value of that. But we are rapidly moving into a world where students are digitally social. But they are
Mhm.
not necessarily physically social. And so the expectation for many of the students these days is that in fact this will be done on my time in an asynchronous manner. It will be a personalized approach that is very effective for me, and it will not disrupt my life as
Yeah,
like you might see with a traditional learning
exactly.
situation. We still have some people who love to sit and read books. I'm one of them. But no, I think the answer is more and more. It's going to be an expectation that that remote asynchronous version is offered. Again, we're going to have those challenges with the skills-based industries. But I think as we look at virtual, fully immersive virtual simulations, we're going to figure out how to teach skills in a digital world that transfer to the real world. So thank you.